he believes in God. I don't know. That's my opinion. He believes in God. And anybody who believes in God is someone for me.
It is currently 8 p.m. on the 1st of February 2025, the year of our Lord. So, a little under or just about a week since President Donald Trump Jr. took office, and May Watisha since then, 10 has occurred. For the past couple of days, I've just been reading up on all his executive orders and memorandum, and I think all of that gave me the gumption to finally sit and record this essay. I've had this essay ready for a while now, or semi ready for a while now. I just found that I had to make a lot of edits given the instability of the political terrain and the predictable unpredictability and volatility of the subject in question. I just had to tell myself that the person we're talking about here, I can't keep up with him. There's always something new with him every 2 to 3 business hours. So here is the final draft of my essay. Prior to researching this essay, I had not been paying much attention to the affairs of the United States, decentering them or whatever. And the period between which I started the research and now that I have the final essay has not been enough time to reconcile with the gravity of a lot of the information. So I'll be sitting with all of that in real time. Furthermore, this video is not me laying any claims to political sagacity. I am not an economist or a psychologist or a financial expert. I am just a Nigerian that likes to talk about being Nigerian. However, this is a very properly researched essay, so I won't be spreading any disinformation or misinformation because that's what I hate to do the most. If you think any of the things I'm saying here is wrong, challengeable, or questionable, feel free to come at me with reason, but don't come at me condescendingly or with political jargon. On that note, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Angela and I like to write essays. My essays will center on my fascinations and frustrations with being Nigerian. So if you're into that kind of thing, stay, like, subscribe, comment, all of that fun YouTube stuff. Thank you. Enough rambling. Let's get into the video. In the throes of all the recent US presidential election and inauguration brouhaha, I found myself very amazed at the sheer display of unironic, unwavering, and borderline perilous support that Nigerians showed for the infamous disreputable choice of candidates. Even with his recent presidential inauguration, I'm sure WhatsApp made bank alone on the crowd of Nigerians that were endorsing and standing 10 toes down, doubling down on their support for this man. This I found this situation very phenomenal. I found the phenomenon very befuddling. So I wrote this essay and I made this video. For the sake of this video, the array of disjointed reasons people give for supporting Trump would be grouped into categories P square, that is personality and policy. These categories are not necessarily independent or mutually inclusive. So that is, they are Trump supporters that champion his policies while disparaging his bizarre behavior and attitude. So a sort of political spin on separating the art from the artist. And there are Trump supporters that could not give a rat's ass about his policies. They just love him for the very bizarre behavior and attitudes that the other group disparage him for, that the other group reproach him for. And there are also Trump supporters that love him for both. So they love him for his policy and his personality, and they think both of these things have to work in tandem to create this enigma of Trump. He is who he is. That's very hard for him to say, but it's not my fault. Yoruba. He is who he is because of his policy and personality. These broad categories, I think, also sum up his Nigerian fan base. And I don't want to be pedantic and start in typical Nigerian fashion throwing special statistics on the percentages and saying, oh, maybe 99% of Trump supporters are in this group that like him for his personality, not his policy. Because I know many of people watching this video, when they start watching it, probably thought this is easy, I've solved the problem. Nigerians are conservative and anti-woke, and that's why they like Trump. So yes, there's a huge portion of Trump supporters. I can even argue, even though I said I would not throw specious statistics, but I can even argue that the majority of them, yeah, are this way. But there are also those Trump supporters that like him for reasons other than being anti-woke and being conservative, or at least they feign to do so. And So it doesn't really matter for the sake of the body of my essay, the statistics on what number of Nigerian Trump supporters like him for one reason versus the other, because that's not helpful to my essay. This essay, I'll be discussing all the Nigerian Trump supporting points you can possibly think of, or at least I can possibly think of, in as much detail as I can get. If there are any Trump supporting points that, or if there are any other reasons you think Nigerians love Trump that I don't cover in this video, feel free to talk about them in the comment section. I'm always open to listening to what's I'm always open to listening to reasons why Nigerians like Trump, because I find Nigerian Trump supporters a very interesting demographic of people. So again, now I don't think Donald Trump Jr. can point out Nigeria on the map of Africa, yet Nigerians remain consistently one of his most ardent foreign supporters. How consistent are we talking?
As for me, I'm going to vote in spirit. I'll support him spiritually with prayers. Trump is going to win this election, and I'm seeing him in the White House in a couple of months to come as the president of America.
Our farm has already spent more than 200 euros on things like this.
Like him, I love him.
You love Donald Trump. If I should be in America, I will vote him.
Additionally, this 2020 Pew article published that as at the spring of 2019, when their data was collected, 58% of Nigerian adults believe Trump to be the man for the job, and this number rose to 63% in 2024. Remember, this is owed to a combination, albeit to varying degrees, of personality and policy factor. So in this, there are people that think Trump will be good for Africa. A moment of silence for those people. Now, there's another faction that recognizes Trump's sham indifference towards the continent and conclude that that means he'll be unhanding us in it. And this isn't too surprising a conclusion to draw, given Trump's history of dismissiveness towards the continent. I mean, the man's entire perception of us is aptly summarized in his famous reference or calling of Africa a bunch of shithole countries. And Nigerians' tolerance to his indifference and hate, even to the point of campaigning for it, doesn't necessarily surprise me. Like, considering our political climate, and also Trump is a rich white man, and Nigerians have an abnormal proclivity for money worship and clambering at the feet of any Tom, Dick, and Harry that has money. But it's deeper than that. Let's circle back to people that think Trump will be good for Africa. So it's not news that geopolitical relations in Africa resemble real life clash of clans, and were central for resource exploitation, and interestingly almost only discussed in terms of threats. So we see this with Trump's 2017 travel ban and just general hostility towards Nigerians home and abroad. There's also the perceived security and economic threats posed by monopolization of Africa's resources by US adversaries China and Russia. So Nigerian Trump supporters like to emphasize that he was the first person to raise awareness and alarm on the threat Chinese hegemony posed to US interest in Africa and to Africa in general. And this is very funny, this is very laughable, because they blanch this to be an ennobling act of altruism, and even a 2-year-old would be able to tell you without any knowledge of world affairs that this is imperialism 101 with a sprinkle of xenophobia. So what is this dissonance? Naturally, since all this attention on the extra presence in Africa, we have moved up the US government laundry list, and it has become even quite the opposite of leaving Africa alone. The outgoing administration, or rather the past administration, Biden's administration, said to have spent over $22 billion in Africa on notable projects like the Lobito Corridor that seeks to connect DRC, Zambia, and Angola to US and European markets via the Angolan Lobito port. And this project was one of the glories of the past administration. It has been praised by thinkers on either sides of the aisle, so both Republican and Democrat thinkers, as a model to replicate and build on to wrest control of Africa's critical mineral supply chain back from China. So it's very likely that we'll be seeing many more things like the Lobito corridor popping up with Trump's proposal of a more transactional approach and his search for critical mineral resources for electric vehicles, phones, and the expansion of the US energy sector. Let's talk US Africa policy in a broader sense. Now, you should also understand that the US operates on this principle of liberal peace. That's the idea that open markets, peace, justice, and democracy all go hand in hand and work in concert to reinforce each other. This principle underpins all their foreign policy, Africa included. And here is a quote on the US Department of State's website on this. So the quote says, supporting democracy not only promotes such fundamental American values as religious freedom and worker rights, but also helps create a more secure, stable, and prosperous global arena in which the United States can advance its national interests. In addition, democracy is the one national interest that helps to secure all the others. Democratically governed nations are more likely to secure the peace, deter aggression, expand open markets, promote economic development, protect American citizens, combat international terrorism and crime, uphold human and worker rights, avoid humanitarian crises and refugee flows, improve the global environment, and protect human health. That was a lot, and those are very big words for my Elmo. But what does this mean? Superficially, this reads well meaningly as a liberal democracy, spreading liberal democracy for the sake of fostering democratic peace and eventually liberal peace. Democratic peace is the idea that democratically governed nations are less likely to engage in armed conflict with each other, owed to the assumption that one, democracies are generally more peaceful in their international relations, two, democracies do not go to war with each other, and three, more democratic states in the international system make the international system more peaceful. So beautiful sentiments, especially that one that democracy is the one slash biggest national interest because it helps secure the others. Remember that from the US Department of State's website. Now, my gripe with this, I have multiple gripes, but my biggest gripe, just like that biggest national interest is democracy, is perfectly captured in this excerpt from the introductory section of the book, The People versus Tech by Jamie Bartlett. So Bartlett says, and I quote, strangely, for an idea that nearly everyone claims to value, no one can agree on precisely what democracy means. The political theorist Bernard Crick once said its true meaning is stored somewhere in heaven. Broadly speaking, it's both a principle of how to govern ourselves, a set of institutions which allow for sovereignty to be derived from the people. Exactly how this works changes from place to place and over time, but easily the most workable and popular version is modern liberal representative democracy. When I use the term democracy from now on, this is what I'm referring to, and I'm only looking at mature Western democracies. To look beyond that is a different subject entirely. So there it is. That's my sentiment. I fear I don't know what US democracy is. It feels very arcane and mysterious, and I fear I can also not question that what they have is democracy because, as Bartlett excellently captured, the meaning of democracy changes from time between time and place. So maybe whatever they have over there is US democracy, but that's not the kind of democracy I want them to be spreading, and that's not what I want their biggest national interest to be, especially on my continent. So yeah, the democracy is very arcane, it's very mysterious. The rest of us bystanders don't know what's going on. I don't know what's going on. Do you know what's going on? Because I don't. Now, all this aside, there's also the idea that trade, peace, justice, and democracy are all intrinsically interlinked, and when one is away from the equation, the whole system just falls apart. Now, I don't so much dispute this. I just question the mechanisms in which it happens. Like, is this something definitely going to happen? Is this something merely likely to happen? How does this happen? What's causing it to happen? So I'm just more curious on all that. Finally, there's also the tacit clause that so long your markets are open to them and their allies, you're in their good books. So we see this with Trump's removal of Sudan from the list of state sponsors of terrorism and unblocking economic aid to them, following Sudan's signing of the Abraham Accords that recognizes Israel's sovereignty and normalizes relations with them. Another good example is the suspension of aid to Ethiopia following their dispute with Egypt over the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Dam on River Nile. Hopefully, it was caught onto that my rhetorics on the mechanisms of destruction of democracy in the absence of trade was merely just that, rhetorical questions. I know the answer. Hopefully, you guys know the answer too. I just intended to demonstrate the exaggeration of trade's importance and its inflated capacity for hindering conflict. Trade cannot prevent or stop conflict. It can at best just dampen the intensity of the clash. And of course, there's the added factor of nationalism and the challenge it poses to trade's ability to stop, prevent, hinder, or dampen the intensity of conflict in the first place. As we can see, trade with Mexico and Canada has not prevented Trump's tariff threats and even their passing. So, like I said, trade cannot prevent or stop conflict. It can at best just dampen the intensity of the clash. So, knowledge of current affairs in general should just put it very clearly to you that trade does not belong in the same sentence as peace, justice, and democracy, or at least to the same degree. And I argue that there's a deliberate obfuscation of this to hide the weaponization of trade as it exists in our current world today in dealing with underdeveloped nations, that is, countries in Africa, for instance. So if they can convince us that trade prevents conflict and the fall of democracy that we don't even have or know what it means, we will not want to withdraw from said trade even if it's one-sided and destructive. So again, I propose that we restructure all that, and maybe we're at that, we might as well just rewrite the entire paragraph because I don't think many of the things there hold any truth to it anymore with Trump in office. I mean, disease control, and your president has already paused US UN funding and withdrew you guys from the WHO. How much disease can you control when you're not part of the WHO? Enough of the tangent rambling. Let's narrow down more to Africa's business under Trump. So Trump promises a more non-interventionist, trade protectionist outlook than his predecessors. Subsequently, there's a huge question mark on things like the fate of the soon expiring AGWA scheme. I'll be saying AGWA and AGOA, they mean the same thing. I'll be using them interchangeably. AGOA stands for African Growth and Opportunity Act, and it was instated in the year 2000 to improve economic relations with the US and sub-Saharan Africa. So it does this by, or it proposes to raise the standard of living and create jobs through aid rather than trade. And it does this by allowing eligible African countries import goods into the US market without taxes. So if you're versed in Trump's tariff threats on foreign goods and services, you might conclude that he's not keen on AGWA, and this currently the scheme is set to expire in 2025. So the stakes are high. We're all shaking our boots. We don't know what's gonna happen. So I am no economist and I cannot predict the future, but I will say two things. So I got to editing and realized that I never actually said my two things. So I'll say now. One, is instinctual for all administrations in the conception of AGWA to leverage our conditional participation in the scheme over our heads. And keyword conditional because that's very important. I'll be revisiting how our participation is conditional. Two, Trump knows this. He knows that all the administrations before him have weaponized AGWA in some way, so there's nothing stopping him from doing the exact same. He also recognizes that the pseudo bipartisan partnership that this scheme provides is useful in countering the influence that China exerts on African economies, and in fact he has his own AGWA-like schemes. Under his previous administration, he instated Prosper Africa and the DFC. Prosper Africa is a strategy to foster US investment by assisting US companies with investment interest in Africa and investing in Africa, and hence expanding Africa's middle class. The DFC stands for Development Finance Corporation, and it was created automatically with the 2018 Senate passing of the BUILD Act. BUILD stands for Better Utilization of Investments Leading to Development, and the DFC essentially seeks to crowd in private sector investments in low and lower middle income countries. So US private sector investments in low and lower middle income countries, helping these countries, these underdeveloped countries, transform into market economies. Admittedly, the DFC is unlike Prosper Africa in the way that it's not Africa exclusive. It just works in lower middle income countries or economies to help them transition into market economies. However, Africa is still the DFC's largest regional portfolio. So, of all the underdeveloped regions of the world, Africa is still the place where the DFC has worked the largest. So, remember conditional participation in AGWA, keyword conditional. more on that. There are these set conditions that each eligible country must meet to qualify for trade under the program, and the US renews the eligibility of each country every year. So if you don't meet any of these conditions, you're booted off the list one time. Forget all that long talk about standard of living and creating jobs. So these criteria include removal of barrier to US trade and investment, support for democracy, protection of internationally recognized human rights, and lastly, not engaging in activities that undermine US national security and foreign policy interests. And they're dead serious about this too. So if you fall out of compliance, like I said again, you're booted off. Shall we behold some of the scapegoats that fell out of compliance? In 2022, under the Biden administration, Ethiopia lost its AGWA beneficiary status for its violations of internationally recognized human rights in the Tigrayan genocide. The same fate applied to Uganda over its inhumane anti-homosexual laws, Niger and Gabon following their military coups, and Mauritania in 2019 over concerns of forced labor and rollback worker rights. There are some speculations on South Africa's potential removal over their refusal to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and some alleged arms shipment deal with Russia too, but their government have since shut that down and denied it. Meanwhile, I should also mention that South Africa is taking a pro-Palestine stance, so I don't know how that's looking for them. In 2018, Trump suspended Rwanda's right to export clothing duty free after Rwanda banned the import of US secondhand clothing imports. And this decision was initially unanimously adopted by Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Rwanda, but the other three of them backed out after the US responded with threats of rescinding their AGWA beneficiary status. Now, Uganda has been, I guess, playing with closing their markets to US secondhand clothing since then, but I don't know where they are right now with that. Something this might also be another factor in their 2022 ban, but that's anyone's guess. The same goes for Cameroon in 2019 over gross violations of internationally recognized human rights. So from all this, we can see that Trump's weaponization for of agua was almost exclusively for trade protectionist reasons, and this his weaponization for almost exclusively trade protectionist reasons helps sell his fake insular pose to foreign sociocultural interventionism. And I call the pose fake insular because the US is a world superpower. Everything has like a domino effect. Once something like is crashing in over there, it's like an avalanche, and then everything is just like falling after it. So you cannot be the president of the United States and not have sociocultural influence like over other economies. It's not possible, no matter how you pose, how you like spin it, and how you say it. The truth, the reality is that as somebody in the United States, as the president of the United States, you are that powerful, like trade wise, culture wise. Yeah. So his Nigerian supporters, Trump Nigerian supporters, they despise Obama style, Democrat style, homo nationalist, democracy feigned, um, imperial interventionism. Um, like we all do, but for a different reason, right? So they have deluded themselves to believe that Trump will be different because his style is different. He doesn't strike for the gays, he strikes for trade. And how really why he can't strike us because we're very like amicable or very agreeable. We will not really offend him in the trade front. However, it's like being gay is like on African. So like if the United States president was a Democrat, he'll be striking us like they struck Uganda, right? But like Trump doesn't do all of that. So that's like good, right? And again, he's putting America first, so there's no nonsense about like caring for women or other marginalized people. He doesn't really give a fuck about all that. Like, however you want to run your country on that front is your business, but he only strive for trade. And like, really, how can Nigeria offend him when it comes to trade? So that's really their like thought process. Now, I'm not here, but I can say it's not looking good. Not that it has ever been good anyways. Trade agreements are usually filled with all manners of fuckery, and the odds are continually dubiously stacked against us. Are we talking resource appropriation, the destruction of our domestic industry, unequal exchanges, the phantasmagoria of foreign aid, and just the import of the disastrous consequences of untamed Western consumption, and the cumulative further entrenchment of our society into mass poverty and underdevelopment. These are all again beyond the scope of my essay, and I don't want to derail all my Trump talk and start talking about exploitative capitalist trade. But if you want to read more about it, I guess I might put something in the description. Back on tangents now. It's not looking good, like I said. At any given chance, the incoming administration emphasizes reciprocity. Incoming, no. The administration right now, this was when I wrote this again, emphasizes reciprocity in trade and increased market access to US goods. And I know I said I won't make any predictions, and I promise I'm not. But I harbor the suspicion that AGWA may only be renewed on the condition that beneficiaries owe US exports increased unbridled access to the market. And I should mention that this is in direct contravention to the OG scheme. The OG scheme is unilateral in nature, so it doesn't necessitate or mandate that the recipients open their market, especially unbridledly to US imports. If this happens, that means that the whole scheme has scattered and we might as well just rewrite the whole scheme. But that's besides the point. Have you ever followed your mom to the market and she's searching for Hungarian slippers, Turkish gown, Italian shoe, all codes for European wears, and they give her American, and then the eye she gives them, you wonder like how much disrespect that was. So from there, you can begin to imagine the ramifications of flooding the continent with cheap American goods. The reality is the American goods are simply not that good. This was another edit I made April 5th, I believe, when like they were just like going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth with the tariffs. And when the US released that long ass list of tariffs that they were going to impose on the world with like China at the top or something. Anyways, I'll put the picture. And I made this edit, even though it's not like pertinent anymore. I'm still going to like make it, I guess, because one, I wrote it. You guys have to hear it. Two, like nothing makes sense anymore. Another reason why I'm still like imputing this edit, even though I'm not really sure how relevant it is because it was at the moment when I was reading the information that is contained in this edit that I had the light bulb idea that tariffs could actually be imposed regardless of agua. So again, I was saying we have to wait to June to see like the fate of the countries under agua, which is still very much true. But like, what is the use of agua if like tariffs are being imposed on these countries that are participants in agua outside of the scheme? Um, I don't know. It don't make any sense to me. But that's why I'm still putting this edit because I was like, wow, wow, wow. So yeah, turns out tariffs can be imposed regardless of agua, and it actually did happen. Right now, I don't really know what's going on in the tariff battle. Last I checked, the US and China made up over a kiss, and the tariffs are like significantly lower now. I also was reading somewhere that these tariffs might be like imposed, but like there's really nobody at the border or at the ports collecting these tariffs because Trump has already fired all of them anyways. So very interesting. Um so the 2nd of April that was dubbed the Liberation Day of the American people by their liberator and the White House. The White House released a list of about 100 countries in total with about 20 African countries that the US will be imposing tariffs on. However, Mago way they calculated these tariffs, they shall arrived at a figure, and so they are like, I'll put the picture of the list and I'll circle the heading of the column so you guys can like zoom into it. But on the left is like the tariffs that the US alleges that other countries are charging them, and on the right is the tariffs that they'll be charging in reciprocity. So Trump calls the tariffs on the right reciprocal tariffs, and he maintained that these tariffs are for countries that treat them badly, cheaters that take advantage of them, and foreigners that pillage them. And by this, he means countries that the US are running a trade deficit with, right? So it also appeared like again, it appears that the calculated tariffs that the US alleges that other countries charge them are not just tariffs alone. They also account for currency manipulations and trade barriers that are indicated in the heading of the left column. that I'll circle in red when I put the picture. So I don't know, this is just really funny to me. It's very like sardonic and also affronting, like insulting that you, an extremely powerful member of organizations like the IMF, WTO, and the World Bank, is coming to say that countries are pillaging you and cheating you. The irony of it all, like you're saying, these organizations, and by extension, so the organizations that you believe belong in, the IMF, WTO, and the World Bank, are allowed to do these things. They're allowed to devalue people's currency. They're allowed to set barriers in trade, but nobody is allowed to do the same to you, which is also funny because this is a non-issue. Nobody except you is seeing these currency manipulations and trade barriers that you're claiming that other people are putting on you. However, for what you and your minions, or what you and the, I don't know, what the organization and its minions, including you, are doing, everybody is seeing. Like, people can see the structural adjustment programs and the impact on the economies, the loan conditions. Everybody can see all of that, but you cannot take mere trade deficits and all of a sudden it's currency manipulation and trade barriers. Anyways, the White House is essentially lashing out at the whole world because the United States runs a trade deficit with some countries, and the running idea is that these deficits are caused exclusively by trade barriers, including and most especially tariffs, which is not true, by the way. I should point out that this is false. But instead of addressing the trade barriers that are supposedly causing the deficits, you are addressing the deficits themselves and treating them as the trade barrier. And deficits are not trade barrier. Deficit just simply means the US imports more into those countries than they export from. So the US buys more from these countries than these countries buy from them. That is not a trade barrier. So again, deficits are not trade barriers. Deficits can be accelerated by trade barriers, but they are not trade barriers. As deficits are a multifactorial thing, they can be caused by trade barriers, but there are other things that cause deficits as well, including like the state of the economy. And deficits are not necessarily a bad thing. I guess the problem the US has is that it's running deficits with multiple countries, hundreds or like tens of countries across the world. And again, this is not a terrible thing. And if you think it is, maybe like you should like examine the state of your economy as opposed to like looking outwards. Like maybe you should look inwards and ask why your country is running a deficit with this many countries around the world. So deficits are a multifactorial thing, but the United States doesn't think this, and that's why they were able to arrive at these bogus reciprocal tariff figures. So what they did is like essentially divide the trade deficit amount by the value of US exports to get the alleged imposed tariff rates, and then they divided the number they abysmally calculated by 2 to arrive at the rates that they, the US, would be imposing on the country in question. So let's take a look at Nigeria, for instance. Nigeria's total exports to the US in 2024 was about $5.3 billion, and her imports were approximately 3.9 billion. So Nigeria sold $5.3 billion goods to the US and bought $3.9 billion back. So we had 1.4 billion dollars in deficits, in trade deficits with the US. So using the formula that the United States also mightily used in calculating their reciprocal tariffs, we'll divide 1.4 billion by 5.3 billion, so the deficit, by the exports, all times 100 to get a percentage. So that's roughly 26.5%. And this is how Trump's administration manufactured the figure that Nigeria allegedly taxes them in tariffs, currency manipulations, and trade barriers. So subsequently, like I said, they divide the number that the country is charging them in tariffs by 2 to get to arrive at the number that they will be charging the country back. So we divide 26.5 by 2 and we're getting roughly 14%. So that's why Nigeria on this list is getting hit with 14% reciprocal tariffs, right? Minus approximations. So now, as a Nigerian sitting in your house right now or wherever you are right now watching this video, do you believe in the deepest part of your heart, where roses cannot grow and sun cannot shine, that Nigeria in its current state is taking advantage of the United States of America? That citizens that are struggling to survive and are barely getting by deserve this on top of the immeasurably life-threatening inflation and living situation? Another thing I should mention is that many of the countries on this list don't actually run a trade deficit to the US. And yes, we can say these countries that don't run a trade deficit with the US and somehow made it on this list are hit with the baseline rates of 10%. So countries like Kenya, China, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Uganda, Liberia, and Senegal are just hit with 10% compared to like 54% for China, 50% for Lesotho, 47% for Madagascar, and so on. So yeah, we can argue that these countries that don't run a trade deficit have significantly lesser. They have the least um tariff rates that are like being imposed on them. And I would have actually let this pass if Trump did not say that the countries with the highest rates are the worst offenders, because that suggests that every country on this list is an offender to some extent. So you begin to question what the offense of the countries at the bottom of the list that are getting hit with 10%. I just want to say that all this all this just like rehashes my suspicion that agua would only be renewed on the condition of increased US exports into the market of the beneficiaries. But let's just wait until June or whenever the president is ready to tackle the issue to decide that. For now, it's just funny that one, tariffs are being imposed regardless of agua and even on Nigeria, and Trump still has Nigerian Trump supporters, like, notwithstanding, even though they swore on their life that Trump will never strike us because we're very amicable and agreeable with trade. And like, if the president was a Democrat, he would have struck us for, like, I don't know, our anti-homosexuality laws and stuff like that. But they are still striking us. I just think it's funny. So, insofar, nothing I've said spells leaving Africa alone or good for Africa. Even more sinister and delusional, this statement insinuates that Trump's anti-establishment stance disaffiliates him from the strengthening of the American imperialist machine. And I think this is very funny because a logical deducible condition that I think should be or should have been would be that no American president, Democrat or Republican, set sail for leaving America alone. Like, damn, even people won't leave us alone. So I don't know where these people are getting all this from, and they are so in love and enamored with this man that they're adding things that he didn't say to his manifesto, and even lying to us when we're telling them that they're lying to prove to us that they're not lying is crazy. So, anyways, let's just say Trump sleeps one day and he wakes up pan-Africanist. Like, what next? Does he like begin to undo and exonerate all the years of underdevelopment that was facilitated by Western activities on our continent? I don't think so, because he doesn't single-handedly run things, contrary to what many people think. The idea that the president has absolute power is something called the unitary executive theory, which I'll be talking about when I quickly dabble into Project 2025. But that's something that is um that's something that is proposed in Project 2025, and hopefully that's still like light years away from implementation. God forbid it ever gets implemented. But yeah, the president doesn't hold absolute power, and I'm stunned that I have to say this because everybody has like basic idea of government. Everybody knows that the president is just a part of one arm of the government, the executive arm, there's the legislative and judiciary, and there's due process and all of that thing. So I just think it's funny that the success of Trump's campaign banked on the fact that the people think he has absolute power to actually be this savior that he like says he is. Now, forget Trump Pan Africanism, because Trump, let's face it, is not Pan Africanist. Now, you also have to think of all the nationalistic, Western supremacist financial superpowers like the IMF, the WTO, World Trade Organization, um, the World Bank, and other giant multinationals are just draw us into and keep us tied up in this exploitative international capitalist system. And yeah, so think about all the financial domination, debt leverages, loan conditions, and structural adjustment reforms, all the good, and the bad. I think a Pan Africanist US president is quite literally impossible because they would have to, again, undo themselves and undo the entire institution of these superpowers. So I don't even know if I should be talking more about this, but the whole idea that any American president is good for Africa is just shambolic, especially if they have not said anything along that lines. But that's just me. Moving on, let's talk on the junction of electoral interventionism. First, let's watch this clip.
He knows there are consequences. And look, one of the consequences that I don't know, I shouldn't say this, it's unfair of me. I suspect you may all think doesn't matter. But I'm confident matters to him, and to other world leaders of big nations. His credibility worldwide shrinks. Let's get this straight. How would it be if the United States were viewed by the rest of the world as interfering with the elections directly of other countries, and everybody knew it? What would it be like if we engaged in activities that he is engaged in? It diminishes the standing of a country that is desperately trying to make sure it maintains its standing as a major world power. And so it's not just what I do, it's what the actions that other countries take, in this case Russia, that are contrary to international norms. It's the price they pay.
Electoral interventionism is the cornerstone of many's beef with the United States government, and from this clip you can also tell is the cornerstone of the United States government's beef with many people's governments as well. Now, I'm not really going to go into the details of the allegations of US electoral interference in Nigerian elections, especially the 2019 election that, in this case, Trump supporters grieve set the stage for the ascension of PMB President Muhammad Buhari's administration. But I'll say a couple things on that. I think it's funny that they're picking sides with government or president of the United States, and even funnier that the side of the person they pick or support in this case is the side of the person whose administration actually works with the president that they have beef with.
So the best thing for me is to keep quiet.
Anyways, now two things I'll say on electoral interventionism in general. Number one, several US firms are involved in Nigerian politics, and the details of their operation are not the most transparent to the general public. Two, no fabric of Trump spells readiness to tackle the machine of American electoral interference. Electoral interference is a pretty conventional approach actually to keeping ahead of your adversaries, or in our case, subordinates, in geopolitical scheming. And moreover, the US was found guilty of intervening covertly or overtly in over 80 foreign elections between 1946 and 2000 alone, and this does not count US-backed coups and invasions. We even have their law enforcement operatives joking to and admitting to this on their national TV.
Have we ever tried to meddle in other countries' elections?
Oh, probably, but it was for the good of the system in order to avoid the communists from taking over. For example, in Europe, in 47, 48, 49, the Greeks and the Italians, we
don't do that
CIA.
now, though. We don't mess around other people's elections,
Only for a very good cause.
Can you do that? Do a Vine video on a former CIA director.
Only for a very good cause in the interests of democracy.
All right, thanks for being here.
Here's a quote from David Shima, the author of the book, and then the quotes from him is in the article called "Does the US Still Interfere in Foreign Elections?" by Jack Goldsmith. First, Goldsmith tells us that electoral interference can take many forms, including vote changing, disinformation, doxing, propaganda, and financial support. Then Shima, the author of the book Rigged, talking about electoral interference in general, said, talking about the US, it has not banned the practice of covert electoral interference, but it's an option that's not actually executed with great frequency. And that is different than the Cold War, but it's also different from saying that that is something the US categorically will not do anymore, which is not where things are. Shima also reports that the US government is torn on how to proceed. Some officials think that America should definitively end the practice, but others disagree. So again, from this, we can just tell that electoral interference is not a Republican or a Democratic problem. It's just an American thing. So that line of argument shut down. So yeah, I don't care. Moving on, let's discuss the junction of Biafran Trumpism, Nigerian Zionism, and Christian fundamentalism. Now, despite the US constant opposition to the subdivision of African states, a minor but significant sect of Biafra cherers, including the sect's leader himself, thinks that Trump would favor Biafra's existence, rise to self-determination and governance like he does Israel. See this video of a Trump rally. Now, I won't deny the Zionist element to this as well. Their Twitter account named Biafra and Israel are one, and plenty more where this came from. Many Biafra supporters are assertively pro-Israel, and they're even drawn parallels between the Holocaust and anti-Semitism and the Igbo genocide and general anti-Igbo sentiments. But it goes beyond this. There are also some Igbo people that believe themselves to be descendants of Gad, the tribe of Gad, one of the tribes of scriptural Israel, and this claim has been critiqued to be unfounded, as the belief was lacking generally in pre-colonial Igbo history and only found to have concretized during and after the Nigerian Civil War / Igbo genocide. So these people, and just in general, other like Nigerian Zionists, are a budding subset of Nigerian Zionists that supports Trump because he's a friend of Israel. And you know who else is a friend of Israel and subsequently of Trump? Christian Zionists. Before I delve into this enigma that is Christian Zionism, I'll do a quick detour and speak very briefly on the conservative manifesto that had everyone and their grandparents mandled up in knots. Drum roll is Project 2025. So I don't think this is really important, but I'm just going to mention that Trump has disavowed Project 2025 on many occasions. Like here we have him saying on that I think it's called Truth Social. I don't know, it's like a social media platform for them people. We have him saying, I don't know anything, I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who is behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. But it's hard to believe him when all his approach to foreign policy, especially with regards to Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, is consonant with what Project 2025 dictates pertaining to Africa. But anyways, what is Project 2025? Project 2025 is the ninth edition of the Mandate for Leadership series, published since 1981 by Heritage Foundation. The first edition was published following the election of Ronald Reagan in 1981 as a sort of policy bucket list for his administration. And since then, the release of these books have coincided with an incoming US presidential administration. So, admittedly, Heritage Foundation cannot legally promote presidential candidates without losing its religious tax exempt status. But every edition of this series has been written under the premise or under the I guess wish that the running conservative candidates would win the election. So Project 2025 included. Project 2025 was written under the assumption that Trump will be president in 2025, or Trump will be president in 2025. Yeah, why 2025? Now, while Trump tries to sever himself from Project 2025, most of his policies mirror and align with the manifesto's proposal, and more importantly, as drafted, many of the contributors to this manifesto, including Heritage Foundation themselves, are highly influential in Washington and more particularly in Republican administrations. Many are even part or soon to be part of this administration. So safe to say, lots of these things in this manifesto will be implemented or are being implemented. So what does Project 2025 say about Africa? Nothing too surprising, actually, nothing new. The manifesto just very well recognizes Africa's resource abundance and that US authority in Africa is dwindling with increased presence of their adversaries, Russia and China. To all this, it propounds a shift of strategy from focus on assistance to focus on US growth exclusively, so cut off to anything that doesn't advance US national interests, that is, roll back on humanitarian aid, promotion and support for American industries with interest and competitive advantage in Africa, increased provision of foreign military education, trainery, weaponry, and security assistance in combating regional terrorism, and the recognition of Somaliland statehood. So yeah, nothing new again. We've already seen all these with the stop work order that froze foreign assistance and humanitarian aid, America's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement and the WHO, and the declaration of national energy emergency, the ending of birthright citizenship, and suspension of the refugee settlement program, setting deportation quota, and all other things. Anyways, throw Project 2025 in the dustbin, because the gag is all these things are things that him, Trump, and his House Republicans have aggressively lobbied for or suggested since his previous administration. And it's funny that Project 2025 had everyone is mangled, because if they had been paying attention, they would not need a book that now creates this situation where anyone can throw stone and hide their hand and say, "Oh, I don't know who wrote Project 2025. I have nothing to do with Project 2025." They wouldn't need this book to tell them what a second administration for this man means for them. Anyways, that all goes without saying. I just went on this tangent because I thought this was the perfect place to speak. The perfect place to speak on this was smack dab right in the middle of my Christian Zionism spiel, given that Heritage Foundation is a Christian nationalist, fundamentalist, evangelicist, Zionist, all the far right Christian adjectives you can think of is them, is this organization. And they're just one of the number of them that exist with these goals and insane amount of influence in the sphere of the United States. Now back to Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism is a very interesting and even superficially ironic faction of Christian fundamentalism, and I'll explain why I said that in a minute. But first, what is Christian Zionism? This definition is from an article called End Times Antisemitism by Political Research Associates. So they said, for the sake of this article, for the purpose of this article, Christian Zionism refers to a movement amongst Christians, mostly charismatic and evangelical, whose interpretation of the Bible mandates their political support not just for the modern state of Israel, but for an expansionist version thereof. So here we have a quote from a Zionist pastor, Pastor Robert Jeffers. He said, Jerusalem has always been the object of affection for both Jews and Christians down through history and the touchstone of prophecy. But most importantly, God gave Jerusalem to the rest of the Holy Land. Sorry, God gave Jerusalem and the rest of the Holy Land to the Jewish people. So this touchstone of prophecy, they said, is shorthand for the Christian Zionist belief that the establishment of Israel is a sign that prophecies are being fulfilled. As alluded to by in this article, or in the article I just read that excerpt from, Christian Zionism predates Jewish and secular Zionism, but was propelled into political action by by the drop of the latter, that is the 1948 establishment of the Israeli regime. So they saw the establishment of the Israeli regime as a fulfillment of prophecy. They thought the establishment of Israel is the first step, or at least is one of the steps necessary for the second coming of Jesus. And that's why they became politically active to make sure that mere mortals don't undo the first step in this God's glorious end time plan. And since then, they have become so violently politically active, and they encourage other Christians to do so. Now, I'm going to say why I call them a superficially ironic faction of Christian fundamentalism. It's because Christian fundamentalism is fundamentally anti Semitic, and Christian Zionists have been one of the most virulent forces of anti Semitism in modern history. They used to collab with politicians of Europe at the time of the Holocaust, and even with politicians today, to push Jewish people out of their countries towards Israel to again support the expansionist version of Israel. And this is particularly concerning because they believe scriptural Israel, biblical Israel, is the rightful patrimony of current day Israel. And biblical Israel expands past the territories that Israel controlled today. It expands into parts of Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and other countries surrounding modern day Israel today. So it's like, where does this stop? Now, these people are globally and geopolitically influential, with the fastest growing areas for their ideologies and just general conservatism being the global south, that is Africa and Asia. And I know firsthand how Nigerian adults hold Israel in high regards, mostly for religious and Christian reasons. So I can tell you that their propaganda is very effective. Alongside their very effective propaganda and the expansion of a Nigerian Zionist class, they also have almost uncurbed access to the political and religious elites of these societies. So this allows them peddle discriminatory, barbaric legislation. A notable example being the Ugandan 2023 anti-homosexuality bill, amongst many others. So clearly, Christian fundamentalism in the global south is a threat to the already turbulent process of establishing whatever modicum of democracy and egalitarianism possible. And on a more serious note, I'll sound the loudest alarms on their accompanying, I'll put that word on the screen, it's very hard for me to pronounce, complementary paramilitary groups that will further arm the virulent vigilante-like conservatism that already plagues countries like Nigeria. Like Nigeria has a hate crime problem because we have state-sanctioned violence against marginalized groups. We have a femicide problem. We have a hate crime problem. And the last thing we need is for these people to come and act as an additional authority on violence and sanction more violence against marginalized people and ginger this vigilantism that we're already dealing with. And the reality of things is that right-wing domestic terrorism propagated and egged on by Christian fundamentalist ideas is at all-time high because US security concerns have been exclusively centered on preventing the next 9/11 and preventing the spread of communism while actively disregarding the congregation of white supremacists under their noses. We have in fact seen on national TV their politicians coddling and borderline endorsing these groups and their lone wolf extensions. So think about Carl Rittenhouse, for instance, to further their political ambitions. So of course, the problem is festering like every other American problem. These people are the export source of this thing globally, and some of these groups are establishing chapters around the world to the point where countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and England have classified various US paramilitary groups as terrorist organizations on the same level as ISIS and Al Qaeda. Now, the US themselves have yet to apply terrorist designations to these groups, and that's very sad and scary because, again, these people's ideologies are spreading fast, and these paramilitary groups accompany these ideologies because the ideologies that egg on these paramilitary groups are Christian fundamentalist ideologies. And the religious climate of my country makes us very susceptible to self-destructive Christian Zionist, Christian fundamentalist extremism, which will just plunge us further into more turmoil and chaos that we already are in. So say no to Christian Zionism and fundamentalism. Admittedly, this Nigerian cult-like reverence for Trump, short of a scandalous taboo love affair, is very astounding and befuddling. But I can say that Nigerians are no stranger to Trump even before his premier presidential run. His books like Think Big and The Art of the Deal went platinum with Lagos traffic vendors, and I've probably even bought one of them myself in Lagos traffic. So these books have established Trump as a charismatic, gregarious, rich, self-made, and therefore admirable and inspirational rich white man. I said rich twice because rich is important. Nigerians love their rich people.
I sell his books almost every day. His book, I sold it almost every day. I organize two copies, 3 copies in a day. When you read his book and you apply it, you will make it in life.
Now, his decision to throw his hat into the 2016 presidential race and his so far bizarre and controversial political career has just sadly further concretized his Nigerian following. And it doesn't matter that many of Trump's speech, ideologies, actions, and policies are at loggerheads with the very personhood of his Nigerian following. That's all negligible in the face of his promise of being America's savior.
It's the best thing that will happen to the world now. Because when he entered there, you know what to do, you know the right thing to do to bring the world together, to bring peace to the world and make everywhere to be okay.
Trump is not a good person and by every count a grave sinner in the average Christian's book. However, this works out very twistedly in his favor. It doesn't matter that nothing about him is Christ-like, he knows little to nothing about the Bible, that he's adulterous and fraudulent, and whatever lines his pockets dictate his morals, and has even slandered Christians on some occasions. Staunch evangelicals believe him to be this flawed vessel being used by God in this war of good versus evil for purposes beyond even his own comprehension.
The prophecy that comes here for Donald Trump is always accurate. God told me there's a political assassination coming for him, that we should pray. which some of the people in the church joined me and we prayed. You can imagine somebody just shook his head this way and the bullet pierced the upper ear.
Yeah.
Is it not a miracle?
You prayed for him.
Yes, I prayed for him.
So they compare him to scripturally unqualified but divinely used figures like Jehu, the king who led Israelites away from idolatry and ordered the killing of Jezebel. In some renditions, compare him to David in the David and Goliath story, given how unqualified David appeared for the fight against Goliath. Now, their secular counterparts suggest that his erratic personality and hateful rhetorics are just a further indication of his authenticity, realness, and humanity. After all, none of us are perfect, and these are all traits they look for in a good leader. So, aside this willful mischaracterization of bad behavior as transparency, honesty, and relatability, there's also an element of envy to it. So, they envy his invincibility and ability to trifle not only with zero consequences, but also compensation and worship to the point of being a second time president of the United States. So they wish they were this rich, badly behaved, and highly praised, but unfortunately for them, they are trapped under the equally oppressive they are trapped under the oppressive boots of equally rich, badly behaved, but uncharismatic and less admirable Nigerian leaders. So they can only live vicariously through Trump since they can't be him. And this quote exemplifies it perfectly. So we're looking at Abiodun, a bookshop owner on the streets of Lagos, and he says in support of Trump, some people are careful with what they say, appear holy, and do things in secrets that you don't know. But he says it as it is. Abiodun also says Trump's often abrasive style shows off his authenticity. So I guess thank you, Abiodun, for affirming me there, for actually proving that people think Trump's abrasive style shows off his authenticity. So in other words, Abiodun is saying that all Trump's criminal convictions, dangerous strutting of mis and disinformation, anti-intellectualism, racist and xenophobic stance are not even flaws. They're just him saying things for what they are. And you'll be hearing this a lot. Trump says things for what they are. And you'll be wondering, what are these things he's saying and what are truly they? What truly are they?
See what it is, what the fuck is it? What it is, what it ain't. What the fuck is it?
And then in saying this, in people saying he says things for what they are, there's an implication that there are people saying things for what they are not, which like ties into Trump's anti-establishment stance. So this phrase, saying things for what they are, is just his supporters' lazy, concise justification for their support, and even scarier, an attestation to Trump's embodiment of the type of leader they think Nigeria is missing. So most of Trump's appeal, like I said, is tied to this his us versus them dichotomy with his anti-establishment saviorism, how he tells the people they're all lying to you. I alone will tell you the truth because I'm the only one that loves you and wants what's best for you and America. No one else does, just me. So he plays into this savior, flood vessel personality that religious fundamentalists have carved out for him because it's the perfect smokescreen or red herring for his stark opposite anti-saviorist policies. Like if you pay closer attention, he's doing the opposite of what he's claiming to do. But these people don't see that. They only hear what he's saying about loving them and putting them first. Or not even them, like loving his country and putting his countrymen first because Trump never said he loves Nigerians or he will put Nigerians first, but Nigerians love him. So they hear Trump making all these promises to the people of his country and they don't care or know about anything else he's saying. That's the only part that matters to them. And they just hope that a Nigerian leader would tell them the same thing too. Now, before I wrote this, I would have called bullshit if I came across someone that said they love Trump for saying things exactly for what they are and they won't expatiate further. I would have called them a cowardice bigot and just gone on with my day. Now, I'll still say that, but with the knowledge that a significant portion of Trump's Nigerian fan base, or just Trump's fan base in general, suffer from what political psychologist Gabriel Lenz termed or described as a prosaic apathetic lack of awareness. So these people or a faction of these people don't actually know what it is. So how can they actually tell you or explain to you what they don't know? And how can they tell you how they can tell that Trump is actually saying it for what it really is? They genuinely don't know the all round gravity of what they are cheering. They're just hypnotized by his savior promises and almost like blindly support him. So this is a This is sad and an unfortunately real, foolishly untenable, politically and generally unsound opinion that many Nigerians proudly maintain is even reflected in our politics. People don't know the manifesto of their preferred candidate. They just hear one thing that makes them happy and they don't care about the rest. They just run with that one thing that makes them happy. Now, all this was not about Abiodun because Abiodun falls under a different group of people. So the next people are like him, was spoken about people that don't know what it is, but Abiodun knows what it is because he says again further down in the article, with Obama, he prioritized gay rights, abortion, and Islamizing agenda. Such policies were not good for America. So sharpshooter, like majority of Trump supporters, they just air their mind straight to the point, no beating around the bush, no merry-go-rounding. And I know these are the kind of people that come to mind when you think of Nigerian Trump supporters. It's a no-brainer. Nigeria is a conservative country, so people are very proud of their conservative and borderline hateful beliefs. You hear a lot of Democrats are spreading the woke agenda. They want to legalize gay. Our African values are being eroded. Those kind of sentiments, you get the idea. And given how pervasive and even omnipresent this line of thought is, I don't usually hold many Nigerians to the highest standards of intelligence discourse on this subject matter. Matter of fact, I like to avoid Trump supporters in real life because they just dampen your mood and thinking faculty with all their talk. Also, sadly, I would acknowledge that we are not the most cerebral bunch, especially in recent times. Like, look at the state of our national thinking, judgment, and comprehension skills in the comment section of stupid IG sensationalist blogs and Twitter banger boys. We are in trouble. How do we begin to propound to these people that they are in the effective spread of this woke agenda that they have made public enemy number one lies their salvation? How do you radicalize them to understand that the ruling class acting with impunity towards a marginalized group that you personally don't like doesn't mean well for you? How do you explain to them that nothing stops a leader that kills women and queer people from killing the blacks, the poors, anybody that dares look at them wrong, and that many oppressions are interwoven and interconnected? Today is for rescinding reproductive rights. Tomorrow is for commodifying the very oxygen that you breathe. Because life is a turn by turn situation. How do you instill solidarity in them in spite of their parochial, myopic, anti woke stance? This strain of hate that Nigerian conservatism breeds is self destructive. It's like an immolation ritual, chasing and rejoicing at the downfall of other people to your own demise. It's very pathetic. Now, I hope you remember Abiodun because he airs more on his multifarious reasons for supporting Trump. He says Trump's America First slogan and policies that disadvantage Nigerian migrants simply just reflects that leaders should put their own country first. And he expresses disappointment in the fact that our own leaders, our Nigerian leaders, have not done that. So Abiodun is not delusional. He knows that Trump 2.0 is not in his best interest, but he just likes Trump because he's putting his country first no matter the cost or backlash, and he just wishes that his own country's leaders would do the same too. Now, this is funny because it's historical. Like, maybe the reason why other people's country leaders cannot put their country first is because somebody won't let them to, but I digress. Now, isn't slavery also like slave masters putting their country first, technically? So clearly, it doesn't matter that the cost of putting that country first is Abiodun's own further systemic disenfranchisement, because according to him, all every country needs is just a leader that will unapologetically create draconian conditions for more than half of their populace. It doesn't even matter if there is no country left at the end of their tenure, for they had done all that in the service of their country, and this is exactly what Nigeria needs right now in her current race to abyssal collapse and total ruin. We just need an iron fist, authoritarian, charismatic too. The person must be charismatic because how else would you tell people to shut up if you're not charismatic? So we just need an authoritarian, iron fist, charismatic leader that will beguile us, and I'm sure it won't even take a lot of beguiling. It's very easy actually. That will beguile us into dogmatically scapegoating an ordered group of people, respect for rule of law, and fundamental human rights as the issues with our society. For these are the issues. The issues are definitely not the congenital corruption of our political class that is rapidly cascading grassroots and into our society at large, and is definitely not the resultant rife economic and moral depravity that has now become synonymous with being Nigerian. The issues are not that when people think of Nigerians, they think of Yahoo boys, they think of poor people, they think of beggars. These are not the issues. The issues are women and other people on the margin. And we need someone like Trump to channel Nigeria into this golden age that is marked by the complete raising down of whatever little atoms of sanity and common sense democracy that we have left, because then only can we be satiated. I cannot begin to wrap my head around the embarrassment of this all. Like, this is so shameful on so many levels. One, this is like some national level daddy issues. We just wish someone would love us and do for us what Trump claims to be doing for Americans. And yes, we will continue to support Trump as the loving father that he is, even though he has told us on many occasions that he doesn't like us. Two, it reveals how shackled we are in our patriarchal colonial mindset and our disposition, sadly, to support and advocate for the oppression of others, even when it means our own oppression too. It also reveals, not that it's really a secret anyways, but it reveals how morally depraved we are and how ignorant we are in our collective oppression. Like, I know we are sacrosanct about our values or the lack thereof, because let's face it, what truly is Nigerian values? But even if you hate LGBT nonsense, women's rights and reproductive rights, do you hate yourself too? Like, answer me that. On this note, we have finally come to the end of this. Like, subscribe, comment, share. My hopes is that I have been able to convince you, and if not confuse you, convince or confuse, pick your poison. You shall leave here knowing that one, Trump is not good for Africa, neither will he be leaving Africa alone. That is just a simply politically unsound opinion to maintain. Two, saying that you like Trump because he says things for what it is just an embarrassing, spineless, and bad attempt at concealing your political unsoundness and or bigotry, both of which render your opinions unfit to be taken seriously. That is to say, you are an unserious fellow. Three, you cannot untether your support for a politician from your support or from support for their policies and the consequences of these policies. And I can't believe I have to say this, but you should support people that you morally, ethically, psychologically, humanly align with. There is no separating the art from the artist, especially in this context. So let's engage our critical thinking faculties, please. Thank you and lights out.